Welcome to Simulation Pulse Live. I need to figure out what episode number. I always want to say like episode number or whatever, but it's been a while. We've had quite a few of these and they're really fun and excited that you're joining us today, um, either live or watching the video afterwards. And this week we have a very special guest, Dr. Jeffrey Jacobson, who I've actually known for, we were talking about this, 10 years. So I think you've known Dr. Jacobson probably longer than any of the other guests for sure that have been on the Pulse, and longer than, yeah, it's been a while. And we actually share an interest in architecture originally. We were both interested in architectural applications of virtual reality and virtual environments, and got an opportunity to talk to Dr. Jacobson back in the earliest days of the DK1 Oculus developer kits.
Mhm.
And then we both took a right angle into the healthcare and medical space. And that's where we are today. And we're going to hear more about what Dr. Jacobson is doing at Boston Children's Hospital as the XR lead of immersive design systems. Sounds like a dream job title to me.
Um, it is. I mean, this is the best job I've had in my life. And it comes at this really unusual moment in history where you have a new media technology diffusing out into the public and into all the industries. Not that VR particularly is new. It's been around for 70 years. It's just that it's become affordable. And so, like you, I'm swimming as hard as I can to ride this wave of adoption. And I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, awesome. We really appreciate you joining us today. Can you tell us a little more about that position, that dream job title? Like, what do you do there at Boston Children's? What are some of the day-to-day types of activities that you do?
Sure. Immersive design systems is part of health affairs in the hospital. We are a service organization that helps all of the other departments, the medical, the clinical departments, do their jobs. So we're alongside the IT department, the janitors, the legal department, um, supporting the work of our clinicians. And our role started out as simulation-based training, and that's still, a very big part of what we do with the mannequins, the rubber babies, the real equipment, and medical sims. We have also produced physical devices that are used in clinical care or in training, 3D prints for patient anatomy, specific to patients for surgical planning, and then systems analysis. And, like, how do we get a patient from this floor to that floor? Complicated. Anyway, my role is I'm doing all of the XR, the VR and AR. Sorry, myself and my colleague Angelina Gu, we are doing the XR portion of the simulation-based training. And I've been here for 5.5 years. Angelina joined us a couple years ago. And so we're sort of building up this program within the hospital.
No, that's great. I'm wondering, in terms of bringing simulation into a hospital environment, I'm told has been a challenge over the past several decades, right? Just simulation with mannequins in any kind of simulation. It seems like there's a kind of an adoption curve there that's definitely starting to become adopted. You see more simulation happening in hospitals, like integrated into the facilities. But I've been, as I'm going to all these conferences and talking to people all over in simulation, it's like I hear this over and over again about how um, challenging it can be to articulate the value of simulation, even though it's been demonstrated with a lot of evidence that it works, it saves lives, it reduces errors. We know this is true, and but yet it's really challenging to get a space where you can have these mannequins set up and you can do the simulation, and then obviously VR is just another layer to that. We're extending a virtual dimension, and we're finding definitely very difficult to get VR simulation installed in hospital environments. So here you are set up at Boston Children's Hospital. What makes Boston Children's so like innovative and sort of forward thinking in this way that they have somebody who's dedicated to XR and immersive simulation as an employee, I think puts you in a whole category apart from other hospitals. So what do you think contributes to that?
Um, Mainly the fact that the simulator program, which is what IDS originally was, has been quite successful. It's 25 years now. And when it came about, it was one of the first. And broadly, what you're saying is true. Simulation is proven in general to be very beneficial, but it's really hard to tell a particular clinician that simulation training will help them in particular with and give them hard numbers, because learning is so complex. There's so many factors involved. We just get our converts one by one as people try it, and then the instructor can see how well it works. And I really like that point you made about the VR being another dimension. It's less different from mannequin sims than most people think.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, so you had mentioned sort of getting one person at a time on board, and I think that's something we recommend. I know Rick in the demos and Bill, I think you've experienced that at Madison College where it's a matter of just get a headset on, put it on and try it. You have to just try it. And usually almost every time if someone tries it, they're like, okay, I get it. I'm never going to question this again. This is amazing. They're usually in right away. So other than that, do you have any other advice for other hospitals that might be looking to get into VR simulation?
Um, the thing that has made us successful is that we are funded by operations, not by research grants and not by innovation money. We are a bread and butter service that helps the hospital onboard new people, onboard new process and procedures to everyone who's existing here, and helps our clinicians refresh. And that way we have a steady, stable income stream, and we can build up over time. What's made us different from so many other hospitals in XR is the money. IDS decided to hire a full-time person, that's me, and then another one, years later. And then Kate Donovan over in inpatient nursing is full-time XR, along with the 5 other jobs she's doing. And so it's just time on task, you know.
I'm on task. That makes a lot of sense. Yep. You had given a presentation earlier this year at is it IVRHA
Yeah.
conference? An amazing conference. If anybody's watching or listening or hasn't already checked that out, definitely look at IVRHA. So Dr. Jacobson gave a presentation there, and you had some images, some slides that you were sharing, and I thought those would be great to share here today at the Pulse. There's a lot of great insights there. Do you mind sharing those with us as we go?
Uh, I would be delighted.
All right, I'll let you take it from here.
All right. So can you see that?
Yes.
Um, so I'm not going to give you, I mean, these slides were for a 3-hour workshop, so I'm not going to give you all of that. I'm going to skip around a bit. Let's see. Um, Immersive design systems, I talked about that. The inpatient nursing program handles hospital-wide onboarding for nurses. That's Kate's domain. I think your webinar participants.
Hey, Jeffrey,
Yeah,
if I can interrupt, I'm fascinated by that because I've had some discussions with some of our customers about the fact that VR can extend beyond certainly the clinical needs that you have for training. And you mentioned onboarding. Can you expand a little bit about how you might be using it outside of kind of teaching and training and just those clinical skills?
well, I mean, onboarding is part of the teaching and training. A hospital is for training is a much more difficult, much more custom environment than a university or a medical school. Because in the academic world, you have hundreds of students. They all have to do what you tell them. You can have a whole classroom, give them an assignment. They're all working through that assignment and so forth. And you can teach them generic things like, generic process and procedure. But in the hospital, every nurse or every doctor who works in a particular department has to know the process and procedures of that department. So when we onboard new nurses, I mean, that's 90% of the work we're doing, in the XR program, well, 80. We're taking people who've been at other hospitals and teaching them the process and procedure for each department. So the onboarding is the majority of the training that we're doing. And as we become more flexible and more sophisticated, we'll be able to handle the more niche things.
Great, thanks for that.
You're welcome. For terminology, I think people on the know what it means, these terms. When I say XR, I abuse the term a little bit to include screen-based sims, that are based on 360s that you can access through a desktop or a headset. And then, of course, VR and AR. And this is the rough breakdown in 2023 in the amounts that we're doing. We have one really interesting project in the pharmacy department that's AR that's blown up to be 20% of what we're doing. I can tell you about that later. Let's see. Let's skip over that. Sim zones. This is a breakdown of simulation-based training laid out by Peter Weinstock and Rusin, and it's in a paper I can give y'all. Zone 0 is just facts and concepts and self-directed learning. Zone 1 is process and procedure. So Acadicus lives in Zone 0 and Zone 1 in the form of the recordings, the 3D recordings. And then in Zone 1, the sort of guided process and procedure, where you're guided by the recording. Is that a fair way to say it? Yeah. And then Zone 2 is process and procedure with a team of convenience, like we have 5 nurses who are onboarding, so that's our team for the day. And they deal with distractions and the unexpected. And then zone 3 is where you're actually teaching an entire team. And so Acadicus, in its role as a virtual sim center, lives in 2 and 3 in that way, being supervised. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's one of the things I think we're always struggling to articulate to, I think, our existing customers and prospects alike, that, there's, a lot of the amazing work that's been going into VR across all the different platforms. They're all kind of sitting in, categories, and we're always sort of like trying to explain that, you can use it as a didactic tool. You can use it as a presentation tool. You can give lectures, you can give interactive lectures, but it's also a self-guided simulation that'll teach you how to do a procedure with the 3D recorded expertise of an SME, like you said. But then it's, I think, most importantly, the ability to facilitate a live simulation, and
Right.
like you say, in that category, in that zone 3, is just as important, and we really try to support all three of those. It's not easy, but we're still open to supporting all three of those. And that's, yeah, for sure, I would say characterizes Acadicus accurately.
I feel like I need to jump to this slide because of what we just talked about. Absolutely. We use 10 different software platforms here because they all do different things for us. And you're I absolutely agree with everything you just said. So this is a concept map that I created can you see my mouse?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So these are proctored sims, meaning it's run by a clinician and or an engineer. Over here, it's automated. And then here are different areas or topics: operating room, ICU, inpatient, outpatient. So Acadicus lives in zone 0 and zone 1 over here, and then zones 1, 2, and 3 over here when it's proctored. Now, there are more dimensions that aren't shown here. And I would say the reason why Acadicus is very flexible and covers a very broad range of expression is the complexity is in the library of tools you have and all the different settings you can create. And it's not in automation. I mean, you have the recordings. That's a very important aspect. But other platforms like Oxford Medical or UBSim automate the scenario. And that's great in that it takes pressure off the clinician. But the more you automate, the harder, the more narrow your range of expression becomes. Not because automation itself restricts you, it's just that the more any tool does for you, the harder it is to use. And that's just true across engineering, design, and software design. Acadicus has its place in our ecosystem, mostly for doing things that none of the other platforms have props for, or where the automation gets in our way and keeps us from doing something. There, that was a mouthful. Any questions from that? I'd say it's pretty central.
No, that's a great way to characterize that. And I think it's, as we get to that point where you're about to do a simulation, there's a stepwise aspect to it. First you do this, then you do that, right?
Right.
Most, the temptation for us, I think, and we do this, we'll build automated interactions. So first you do this, and then you get your green checkbox and it's all
Mhm.
programmed, but if you look behind the scene, if you could pull back the curtain and look at what's happening behind the scene, it's a whole bunch of code.
Yeah.
It's programming and code that's going into that. So if you say, I want to take that oxygen and move it from the left side of the bed to the right side of the bed, all that code is like, nope. It's like, go back to the team of programmers and have the programmers redevelop that content in order to have the oxygen over there. And it might take us a month to get that done. But what we're trying to do is make it more real-time editable. So you can just grab that oxygen and move it over there. But
Right.
now it's going to lose its connection to what it is in the context of that automated simulation. So you're
Right.
absolutely right. I think you said it more eloquently than I am, but that's basically the trade-off that we're always trying to articulate is that we can automate all these things so that they automatically work and you can do those, but then you cannot customize it. And one of the things that people really, I think, value about Acadicus is that customizability. So we're constantly going back and forth on that. And we try to do both, but I think we're better in terms of being able to customize and create your own simulations.
Um, I think that if you're automating a prop to behave more like the real world item, that's not going to limit you much. And exactly as you said, if you do scenario automation, suddenly that starts to limit you. So I'd say I recommend that you lean into your strength, which is that flexibility, um, and which then requires very hands-on operation by the clinician, just like in a mannequin sim. On the other hand, that means I can change the sim on just like that, you know, like somebody comes in and they don't know as much. We can slow things down or speed it up or whatever. So it's all good.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think, that's what I think is really magical about simulation for me and what I fell in love with when I started learning about it, many years ago at this point was, that these are tinkerers, these are people who like to roll up their sleeves and they like to, I love Bill's story about setting off fire alarms with, simulations that they're running and just, it's rip and tear and try and test and prototype and and then hopefully along the way, you're gathering data, you're conducting research, you're studying what's working, what's not working, and you're refining that and you're getting better and better at it. And it's the people who teach it. It's the sim techs, it's the instructors, it's the facilitators, it's the participants to a certain extent, all working together to kind of sharpen that over time and get better and better. And hopefully it gets to a point where it's in tandem or lockstep with actual practice, right?
Yeah,
But what I think we run into when we try to pre-program is you have to pre-program around one SME or
right.
a couple of them. So you're sort of like building the entire program around the way one person teaches it. And when
Mhm.
we were at IMSH in 2018, we were demonstrating the airway lab project that we had done for Adtalem Global at the time. And everybody was blown away. They're like, whoa, this is incredible. I got to do it, but I want to move this over here and I want to do this over here. And, it just becomes they want to be able to use it in a flexible way they do like they do with the mannequins, but it's
Mhm.
very difficult to do those modifications. So I think it's important to give the tools to the people who are creating that because then it keeps them in that innovation loop rather than just like, well, let's see what one SME came up with, in a kind of a vacuum, and then if you want to make any changes to it, it's going to be 6 months, 9 months, $200,000 later, you can get your change back, right? So
Yeah, well, it's like with the automated platforms that have an editor, like UBSim, which is a very interesting case because it's the polar opposite of Acadicus. It's it's actually very easy to reprogram it, but its range of expression is extremely narrow. It does one thing, and it does one thing really, really well, which is nurse training scenarios for an ICU bay. And it does maybe a half of them or a third of them, which is huge. It's very useful. But they've made the exact opposite set of trade-offs, you know. And then you have other platforms that sort of fall in between. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I always joke with the folks at UBSim that we would be a great bundle, right? If we came together, because they do something we don't do, we do something they don't do. We work
yeah.
together very well, and I think they agree. And they're very innovative, great people, building some incredible things. And yeah, I mean that's absolutely for sure the case, that there's a balance there. And it's not unlike simulation labs, right? You've got specialized skills trainers that are in a sim lab too. And I think a lot of people sort of mistakenly, probably just because of budget restraints, if I'm honest, it's sort of like, we want to do VR, and they're like, okay, let's pick a vendor. But you would never do that in a sim lab. You don't just have one vendor that provides every single consumable and mannequin and piece of equipment you probably have 30 different vendors that are working to provide all the different equipment. So it makes sense that I think we kind of want specialized VR platforms like that, because then you get the best of all those worlds, and then some of them are more general purpose, some of them are more specialized, and
Yep.
you eventually kind of create this mosaic of products that are based on what you really need to do as achieve as your learning objectives.
Exactly. And the limitations of, what people will put up with is going to make that mosaic a reality forever, regardless of the advance of technology.
Yeah.
And Oxford Medical Simulation is another one. They're even more automated than UBSim, but they have a wider range of expression. But their editor, which they've just come out with, is very complex. Like, you need an engineer to use it. One of the uses I'm thinking of for Acadicus is to prototype scenarios and refine them a bit before we decide to automate them using some other platform. If we even get to that point, so.
Yeah, we had talked about that a while back. I was looking at Boston Dynamics, the robotics company. I think they're a great use case where they built these sort of all-purpose, general-purpose robots, right? And then they watched what happened with them, what the customers were doing, and they identified, like, well, it looks like a lot of the customers are using it to make the robot go into this one dangerous place and open this one door. And then they built a robot that does just the thing to go open the door, right? So,
Right.
it's like the all-purpose robot is sort of like giving you the insights. It's sort of like a terrarium in a way, where you're kind of studying what's happening and like, okay, this is working. And so we've thought about that too, just sort of like using Acadicus as a method of prototyping those sorts of things, for sure.
Yeah. Well, can I show you a few more slides?
Please do. Please do.
By all means. Let's see. So here we go.
Great, yeah, there it is. And while Jeff's bringing that up, don't forget, folks, if you have a question, please put that in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to it.
Yeah. So this is a little bit out of date, but it's a map of the individual projects, or some representative sampling of projects in the hospital by inpatient nursing and by IDS, and where they fit on the zones chart versus where they're deployed. So, and that's another mosaic, right? We have to think of, I mean, we're working in all these different departments. Let's see. And this sorry.
I'm looking at that slide. Have you done simulations that span, you kind of indicated that you already do, but like span different disciplines or different scenarios. Like you're going from, maybe the patient starts off in the ED, and then they're moved into an ICU, then they're moved into a hospital floor in a traditional, maybe even a home healthcare setting after they're, there's
Right.
like, healthcare is this whole entire spectrum. And rather than just like, let's simulate this one narrow sliver, that's never what happens in the real world. So do you run simulations that kind of span a whole kind of situation, or is it more kind of like, let's simulate one thing?
Not yet, but we're getting there. We produced Sereno Health for the Apple Vision Pro. It's a little proof of concept on how to use a pump, but we have this much broader concept map for where we want it to go. And it does exactly what you're talking about, following the patient's journey. As it happens, um, literally up through 2023, all of our VR sims were, each VR sim was in one department only. Like a department clinician made a request, we made the sim, and they're using it and they're happy. Literally this year, they started talking to each other and comparing notes, and they're asking us for each other's stuff. So we have a code card scenario that's in 2 different departments. We have, and will soon be a third. We've got, we're creating slightly different versions of our training modules to fit in the different departments. And that's why it's essential. All of the software we work with has an editor in it. That's why we never went with some of the industry leaders, in XR Sim, because they just had a library of modules, and that's really not useful to us.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Anyway, let's see. We're running up against this a little bit.
Oh yeah, that's
Right? The more we
very
innovate,
familiar.
right? And then we spend time delivering. And so this is how we're always arguing for more staff.
I think you got Bill's attention with that one.
Right?
Bill is the sole XR lab manager, director, running simulations all day, all the time.
Instructional design, and I just
Instructional
did a
design.
16-hour day yesterday, so I'm
Yeah.
definitely feeling this graph right here.
Gonna need the two X FTEs.
You
Pretty
want to
soon.
use it? You can totally steal this.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, there's no doubt, especially if you're the person that this is exactly what is what's occurring. There's no doubt.
Yeah, that's it. Let's see. This is a breakdown of delivery. So you see it's mostly nurses. We're mostly using VR and a lot of screen-based sim. The AR is, right now, it's just in pharmacy, but it's gotten bigger. And this is by sim zone. And it's pretty interesting. Zone 2 is really big because that's what you do during nurse orientation. You like get 5 of them in a room. We put headsets on 2 of them. They do a sim while the other 3 watch. Then we switch, that kind of thing. And this is our lovely growth curve. I'm not showing you Q1 because there's a big dip because this one enormous education project, got done. But look at this. We started out it was years, a couple of years before we really figured out how to deliver XR sims. And we realized that we had to be there to deliver it by hand. And when I say a project is piloting, I'm sorry, let me show you what this graph is. These are the years and the quarters. These are the hours of training or treatment and education delivered per quarter. And the absolute numbers are really not that big, but we're just getting going. Anyway, a mature project it's a VR sim that I can take off the shelf and I can just use it and it'll work. Doesn't mean, we update it from time to time. A VR sim is in pilot mode where we have to change it every time. We're sort of holding it together with rubber bands. So I'm excited about that. Any question there? Now, here's a maturity model. And this is for a hospital, which looks a little different than a medical school. At the first stage, at the first stage, you're just trying things, right? If your organization has never done VR before, never done AR before, you just have to get out there and try everything. And you can't be all that organized about it. You obviously want to do your homework, find out what the most likely, most helpful tools will be, but you also have to just randomly try things. Then you develop your in-person delivery model where, it's sort of concierged. Everything is very, cut to fit. Then in the next stage, you're doing a lot of pilot projects. And that's where we were here, right? Where you're creating training products that are still in an early stage. And then you have early maturity, which is where we are now, where you have a lot of established things that you're able to deliver. And delivery is increasingly either automated or we train the clinician how to use the tech. So that from our point of view, it's like it's automated, And a medical school can progress through these stages more quickly than a hospital can, simply because they're not restricted by having a lot of different details and a lot of different departments, and they also have scale. The hospitals have the money, hospitals have more money, but schools can concentrate their money more effectively. That's why all of the VR training platforms generally make their money on the medical schools. So there. Any questions or comments on that?
How was the reception to, you had a lot of the pilots there, and then I guess two questions from me is, how was the reception from your clinicians? And then how many return customers did you get? So how many people came back and said, "Ooh, I want to do that again"? Or approximation, was it a lot?
It's your typical startup company curve. We got a lot of interest, a lot of people want to do a demo and see it. And most of them, I mean, some of them said, but most of them said, hey, this is really cool. And then we didn't hear from them. And then we had the early adopters, and we worked with the early adopters. And then I don't know, I would say we have a very assembly line process where someone submits a request into our portal, it's reviewed, we decide to put resources toward it. We do these rather big projects. And I'd say only about a quarter of them actually became a training experience that got used. And a lot of that, if we were starting today, our hit rate would be a lot better because the technology is so much better.
Yeah.
So we wanted to be a first mover in this space, which means you actually have to start doing things before the tech is ready, so that when it is ready, boom, it snaps into place.
Yeah, I agree. We were in a similar situation with that where, we were well before the tech was ready and could do everything we wanted it to do. And now we're sort of in that refinement period where it's just now we're kind of tweaking the things and getting them the way that we want, and we've got a good usage on it. So thank you. That's perfect.
Oh, you're welcome.
Perfect question. Or perfect answer.
I want to share again. I just wanted to focus on you while we were talking about.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem. We had very early on people who were like, meh, no, not interested. And then now we're starting to see those come back. And I think it has a lot to do with the early adopters who are kind of going around and going, oh yeah, we're doing that. We've been doing that for a while. And then the other people are going, wait, why aren't we doing that? And there's even a little bit of tech jealousy. I love tech jealousy because it drives innovation. So I like it. I like it where they're like, oh, they're using that. Why aren't we using that? And then they start to go, well, we're going to use it and we're going to do this with it. And so we have that tech jealousy that drives innovation. So I love that. And it's, obviously good to hear that it's very similar no matter where we go. Like, we get it's the human population, I guess. So
it is. And I am really, really happy that we are giving our early adopters a good payoff. They are now enjoying, regular delivery of these useful things and because they're early adopters, they had a lot more input than anybody else. So it fits them better. They also had to live with us during all that painful time. Now, there's a different model for building your experiences that I think is really important. And this is what Kate Donovan is doing in inpatient nursing. She lives with the nurses. She's, does some nursing duties as well. And she is a genius and produces XR experiences. Most of them are 360 based, but she creates these small, fast, simple, highly targeted solutions on the spot. Like, oh, you've got a half a dozen nurses coming in and they need to learn XYZ. I'll give you a thing for that. And she'll just do it. I think in a medical school, there's less need for that. But here in the hospital, it's very effective. And this is their curve. and they've delivering quite a lot, mostly through screen-based sim, but they're doing a fair bit of VR as well. Well, let's see. I think our biggest challenge is how do we scale up? We've got all these headsets and so we're looking more at automated sims for doing that. And Acadicus is in there, has a role in it, with delivering the proctored experiences, helping us prototype things we might want to automate later. There was one, oh yes. And I wanted to show you one project. Where is it? Here we go. This is augmented reality. We're doing this with the pharmacy department, and we're using Scope AR, which is an AR authoring platform for instructions. And it allows us to create a virtual workspace and then a floating window with instructions and then physical props here. It's pretty neat. So
that's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, they're a really great company. Whoops, that's very academic. Let's not dive in. All right. Yeah, it's pretty neat. That's another really good company. I'd love to introduce you to them.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey, are those HoloLenses? Is that the hardware?
That is the HoloLens 2, and we are, fingers crossed, we're looking to upgrade to the Apple Vision Pro. And so we're figuring out if the AVP is going to do what we need it to do. I mean, it's an amazing tool, but the devil is in the details.
Yeah, the custom lens inserts is what gets me every time. I wear glasses, you do too. I mean, it's just like, how do you can't have like a lens crafters in the back room just grinding out lenses for every single person.
No.
Which isn't what Apple wants anyway. They're not trying to get to that market. I think they're obviously working on that. And I think we'll see later releases that are much more oriented toward higher throughput like we see in education. But for now, it's like, it's kind of your Vision Pro is your Vision Pro. It's a personalized device. It's hard to use it in a school.
And yeah, and that's what Apple wants, and it's fine. They can want that, but that's not the way we're going to use them. We were just talking about it literally yesterday. We're going, in the short term, we're going to have the HoloLens for the people who do need glasses and don't have contacts.
Well, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and we'll experiment, but with having like a rack of the inserts with different diopters. I think I think single vision inserts will work for most people.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'm hoping. So we'll work on that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, we're approaching the top of the hour, but there's one question I really want to ask you before we run out of time is, one of the things I'm always trying to move toward, and it's difficult because you've got to work on what's in front of you, but what I really want to get to is, not simulating simulation, but simulating the real world. Yes. And I'm always eager to talk to people that are working in hospitals like you are, because you've got real world use cases on every floor of the hospital. And obviously there's patient privacy protection. You can't just take those cases and then replicate them, but at some point we'll be able to anonymize that data or even not anonymize it and just make sure that the data is secure, that before you go in and interact with a patient, you have an opportunity to go into a simulation bay. Hopefully it's right there on the floor. Maybe it's even right outside the room. It's part of the electronic medical record, has a little thing you put on, and all right, let's practice before we go in. What do you have any thoughts on that in terms of, how do we get closer and closer to there's a real patient with a real condition that we want to make sure we're prepared to care for effectively? Let's use virtual reality to simulate it first, so we're all ready when we're interacting with that patient. Any thoughts on that? How do we get there, Dr. Jacobson?
Um, that's a huge thing, just-in-time refresh training, and we've been talking about it since I arrived there, and probably before. I think in the short term, you need lightweight tools. Something that is on an iPad or in a headset that is wired to just take you straight into a recording of like a procedure, like you have, and has to be set up in advance for the clinicians to use. So we have certain emergencies that happen infrequently, but on a regular basis.
That's
right?
the key.
Like half a dozen whatever in a year. So nobody has a chance to get expert at it. And we want to do refresh training around it. So yeah, it'll require automation and targeting and planning, and we'll get there.
Maybe some kind of an AI layer that's, taking that data and automatically building the experience. So there's no involvement whatsoever. It's just a headset or a tablet or something that's sitting there, and it knows what's about to happen because it's seen it 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times all over the world. It
Right.
knows what the most likely errors might be. It knows the individual that's putting the headset on and what their tendencies might be and the areas they still need improvement, where they should focus. I just think it could get really, really close so that before you walk in that room, you're ready. You've got deja vu. You've already been there. You've done it before. That's the
That
amazing part of it.
someday AI should be able to provide that, but not anytime soon. And the problem is that AI has knowledge. It does not have judgment. It is doing, the large language models are doing a very, very sophisticated pattern matching task. So that's why you get these hallucinations where, if you've worked with ChatGPT and you ask it, write me something, and 80-90% of it is right, and then 10% of it is just insane. And there's nothing in its nature or its structure that tells it this crazy wrong thing is wrong. And for medical, particularly for a just-in-time medical sim, that has to be 0.
Yes, 100%. I
So
agree with you, and that's our approach too. Exactly. It's like a lot of people are asking us, "What's your AI? What's your AI play?" And we're raising capital and building, and so investors are always kind of AI, and we're like, yeah, it's important. We are for sure tracking and prototyping, testing. We're all over it, but it just seems a little early to be releasing to the public in a way especially if we don't know really how to keep it on a very short leash. We don't know how to make sure that it's not going to hallucinate. It's not going to teach errors. It's not going to respond in an inappropriate way if it's a patient there's ways to handle this with prompting, and we're looking into it, but it'll be a little while. We're going to take a patient approach to that, make sure we're ready for it before we release that to the public.
Right.
Just a comment on that. Actually, I see AI being much more helpful to us here in VR Sim by being able to feed it prompts and have it build that kind of just-in-time training you're talking about. Hey,
Yes.
give me a ICU room with a patient that's on a ventilator and has a dopamine drip and is in this kind of heart rhythm,
Yep.
and have it build that kind of room. Now that would be extremely powerful. That would be
Yes,
awesome.
it would. Yes, it would. And you can then go and remove the hallucinations that eventually get in. AI is a great productivity tool. It can automate a lot of routine tasks. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we've approached the top of the hour here. I just want to take an opportunity to thank you. I mean, this has been fantastic. A lot of great insights here. And I just want to take a moment to also just really thank you for sharing this knowledge in terms of, you're out on the front, and really trying new things, doing those pilots, testing that. But you could very easily just keep that to Boston Children's Hospital and not tell anyone about it, right? It's a competitive differentiator.
Right.
But you're sharing this, and I think that's incredibly generous. I think it's important in this early stage of VR development. All of the research and the slides and the images, the presentations you're giving, I think that's only helpful to get everybody to start understanding the value of this. There's a lot of potential, and I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. We have to share because we depend on others sharing as well. So we have to do our part to build up that, social pool of knowledge. And, that's how it's done in academia and engineering and all technical fields. So thank you for recognizing that. And we
course.
are a nonprofit after all.
Yeah, that's where the best stuff is. And I think we're just starting to see the beginning of it. And I'm hoping the Simulation Pulse and other events like it can help bring people together. But these are early days. Nobody has this all figured out. This is innovation time. This is a tinkering time. This isn't a we figured it all out and we're going to build a platform and make millions and millions of dollars selling. This is not get rich quick. This is prototyping, testing, tinkering. And that's really, really important. And then sharing what you're finding with others. It's just how it works. And it's really, really important.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you all very much for your time and
Yeah.
have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Sure.
Matt,
Take
for
Bye-bye.
joining.